Good morning, Year 10. As for the WeDuck message, a couple of you mentioned it would be quite handy to have some GCSE exam questions modelled to you, which is what we're going to do today. Hopefully I'm going to try and get a video a week out to you, ideally a 12 and 16 marker, so you can kind of practice and go over the Elizabethan topic on your own at home. So let's kick off. The question today is: the biggest reason for the failure of the revolt of the Northern Earls was Elizabeth's swift response. How far do you agree? The stimulus you've been given is Elizabeth raised an army of 14,000 soldiers and the Spanish reinforcements. So a classic reminder that obviously we need, for a 60 marker question, 3 paragraphs and a conclusion, just to stress that. And then what I'd like to do is just quickly highlight the important parts of the question. So the revolt of the Northern Earls is something we need to understand. Elizabeth's swift response is one of the reasons given. And then we have to weigh up the biggest reason. So these are the 3 things I kind of want to pick apart first. The first thing I'm going to look at, and just to kind of mindful that as you're learning a lot of this from home, it'd be useful if I kind of go over these topics when modelling an exam question, so you kind of understand it. I just want to go over the reasons why the revolt of the Northern Earls kicked off in the first place. So firstly, when was it? The revolt of the Northern Earls was in 1569. Mindful that there are a lot of dates quite close together for the Elizabethan topic. One way I kind of remember this date is that it was exactly 10 years after the religious settlement. So if you remember that the religious settlement is 1559, just remember 10 years on top of that, 1569 is the revolt of the Northern Earls. Okay, so 10 years after religious settlement. These are kind of 2 big dates you need to know for this course. One reason. There are kind of 3 reasons I want to talk about for why the revolt of the Northern Earls kicked off in the first place. Naturally, with a lot of this topic, one of the reasons goes back to Catholicism, okay? So, as we know, the north of England was a major Catholic hub. We know from the religious settlement that Elizabeth kind of turned the country, or stressed the fact that the country had to turn to a Protestant country, okay? And the Northern Earls wanted to restore their kind of Catholic roots. What Elizabeth also did was that Elizabeth appointed James Pilkington, who was a staunch Protestant, okay, he's a strong Protestant, as Archbishop of Durham in 1561. Okay, so Elizabeth appointed James Pilkington, who was a strong Protestant, as Archbishop of Durham in 1561. This was the most important religious position in the north of England. So naturally, it would have annoyed and frustrated the old Catholic earls from the get-go. As well as this, James Pilkington was very unpopular, and he turned lots of the north against him and the English new religion. Okay, so he was very unpopular. Second reason, politics. So the Northern Earls traditionally have been very influential in England. The Northern Earls have been traditionally very influential. They'd been in charge of protecting, as we know, the kind of rivalry with Scotland, and the border had been very porous, so lots of kind of fighting in England and in Scotland between the 2 countries, and therefore it was really important that the Northern Earls were there to protect England's border. So they were traditionally very, very important. Okay, so it's the old families who controlled the north of the crown. 2 families in particular who we look at are the Earl of Northumberland and the Earl of Westmoreland, and these are kind of instrumental players in the revolt of the Northern Earls. The Northern Earls were traditionally very influential, in particular Earl of Westmoreland and Earl of Northumberland. Okay, these are the two players we're going to talk about today. What Elizabeth did again, so she annoyed the Northerners again by appointing a rival northern family as the person in charge of the border. Okay, so Elizabeth appointed Sir John Foster, okay, from the Foster family, as the person in charge of protecting the northern border. What this did was that it really frustrated and annoyed Earl of Northumberland because he felt it undermined his position. So the Earl of Northumberland felt undermined and a bit annoyed. And finally, lastly, is again another kind of topic you can always go back to with Elizabeth in the early years is Mary Queen of Scots. She always has a part to play in a lot of the kind of aggravation for Elizabeth. So Mary Queen of Scots. We know that Elizabeth refused to name an heir, and therefore if she died, naturally the country would be thrown back into chaos and people were still very mindful about the English Civil Wars. Actually, my apologies, the English Civil Wars hadn't happened yet, but they were still mindful of the War of the Roses, what I should say. Okay, so Elizabeth refused to name an heir, and if she died, England would be thrown into chaos. People worried about civil war. Okay, so therefore, what happened was a conspiracy. How do you spell conspiracy? Conspiracy began for Mary Queen of Scots. I'm just going to call her MQS, to marry the Duke of Norfolk. So conspiracy theory started kind of coming about. So what actually happened then in the revolt of the Northern Earls? Why did it all kick off? Basically, Elizabeth heard about this conspiracy theory and arrested the Duke of Norfolk. Okay, so Elizabeth hears conspiracy and arrests Duke of Norfolk. What that does is it panics the Earl of Northumberland and the Earl of Westmoreland, and they basically kickstart their rebellion. Okay, so Earls of Westmoreland and Northumberland panic and push ahead with their plan. What they then do is the Earl of Westmoreland and the Earl of Northumberland, they panic, push ahead with their plan, and they basically seize control of Durham. Okay, so we know that Pilkington is in charge of Durham. They basically override Pilkington, who flees south, and they take control of Durham, especially Durham Cathedral. Okay, so they take control of Durham from Pilkington and celebrate Mass. This is very important, okay? So because we know that they want to be Catholics, they don't want to be Protestants. So what they do is they take over Durham Cathedral and celebrate Mass, which is this Catholic service. So this is actually quite a serious kind of statement from them, I suppose. After this, all of the northern parts of England is taken over by the rebels. All of northern England is taken over by the rebels, and Catholicism is temporarily restored. They then wait for their Spanish reinforcements. So one part of the kind of conspiracy theory is that the Spanish are going to help them by coming into Hartlepool. So the northern rebels wait for the Spanish reinforcements. But what happens is the Spanish reinforcements never come. Okay, so the northern rebels wait for Spanish reinforcements who never come. The southern force in support of Elizabeth of 14,000 troops marches, so the southern force of 14,000 troops marches north, and the rebels then flee because they haven't got the Spanish reinforcement. Westmoreland escapes, but Northumberland is captured and executed at York. Okay, so this is the failure, this is the what happened, why the revolt of the Northern Earls happened, what happened, and then why did it fail. So it's the last bit we're going to look at. Why did it fail? And this is what links to our essay question today. So there are 3 reasons it failed. We've been given 2. Elizabeth raised an army of 14,000 soldiers and Spanish reinforcements. So why did it fail? 1. Elizabeth raises 14,000 troops. Spanish reinforcements. What I would like you to now do is just pause your video and try and write down as many reasons you can think of to put underneath these 2 facts. Okay, so Elizabeth raises 14,000 troops. Write down as many reasons you can think kind of linking to that, and the same for Spanish reinforcements. So just pause your video now. So Elizabeth raises 14,000 troops. Okay. The Privy Council summoned support from the south to defend Elizabeth, and therefore an army of 14,000 was raised within 1 month. They reached the River Tees, which is up in the north of England, roughly 30 days after the rebellion started. So I'm actually just going to take this out, but 14,000 troops raised within 1 month and reached the River Tees, and they marched north and reached the River Tees roughly 30 days after the rebellion had started. This shows a unified southern support and a quick response from Elizabeth. Okay, so it shows a unified southern support and quick response from Elizabeth. So that's one reason. Okay. Second reason is to do with Spanish reinforcements. So the Northern Earls were actually relying on a Spanish force to arrive into Hartlepool to support them. So Northern Earls relying on Spanish reinforcement to support them. Relying on Spanish reinforcement to support them when coming in from Hartlepool. So this is a kind of city in the north of England. Yeah, they were expecting the Spanish to arrive into Hartlepool and save them. Okay, what happened was the Spanish didn't. Therefore, the Northern Earls had actually divided their army in 2. So Northern Earls had divided their army in 2. One part went to Hartlepool to go and meet the Spanish, and the other part to County Durham, where they met the southern kind of advanced army. The issue was because they were only half of the Northern Army there. Yeah, that when they faced the southern 14,000 troops, they were incredibly outnumbered. So Northern Earls therefore outnumbered 2-1 when facing advancing Southern Army. So if the Spanish had actually been there, and if the Spanish had kind of come through on their promise and arrived into Hartlepool, maybe that everything would have been different. The final example, and I'm just mindful I've only got 15 minutes of this video, so the final example I want to talk about is the lack of general support within the north. So despite loyalty to Catholicism, many northerners, especially powerful earls themselves, were not prepared to join the rebellion, which meant the force never grew above 6,000. So the third paragraph you can talk about is a lack of general support in the north. Okay? What I would like you to please do is use this information today, and sorry the end bit's rushed, but to come up and answer that essay question. Okay, thank you very much.